So first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. So let's dive right into the topic of budgets and their integration with the chart of accounts in the ERP system. Can you start by explaining how budgets are typically managed in organizations? Are they usually a part of the ERP's chart of accounts or are they maintained separately?
Well, they're separately. Typically, when you think of accounting, that's looking backwards, and then the budget's looking forward. But then there's also like budgets, and then there's forecasts, which oftentimes I would argue are different, and different types of forecasts. When we're talking about a budget, that's usually over the current year or the next year, monthly forecast. And so you could argue that it does align with chart of accounts, and it could be managed similarly. And I have managed a chart of accounts level budget and made sure that I update the budgets into the chart of accounts, into the ERP system. It's actually not usually required. And in some cases, it's usually done by a separate tool outside of finance, more of FP&A tools, as opposed to the ERP main accounting system.
So moving on to the next question, how do revenue and cost heads from the COA in the ERP map to budget breakdowns in these FP and A tools?
So usually what you have to do is you take your chart of accounts with all the different, call it detailed accounts and levels for that. And what we're trying to produce are, I'll call them, the end output is management reporting. So what is the budget or the forecast that management needs to be able to make the right business decisions, see the impact of changes that are happening? And even though the chart of accounts might be done at a more detailed level or have different other dimensions, a lot of times what you need to do in finance is take that and translate it, map the accounts over to say these accounts map to this, revenue grouping or this cost grouping. I think you said cost heads, but I'll describe it as cost groupings so they can roll up to the budget of the management accounting.
What level of granularity is generally required for budgeting in industries like manufacturing and firms?
The level of granularity is equal to the decisions that need to be made by managers, by the people who are making decisions on how the business is going to perform. In some cases, you might have too much granular detail, and there's really no difference between the different chart of account details and making different decisions. In other cases, there's not enough detail to be able to understand what's really happening, and then you're blind to it. One of the key variables here is there's a chart of accounts. Think about that being like your general ledger, and there's all sorts of slicing and dicing you can do across the full business with that. But then you also have subledger. You have accounts receivable, accounts payable, and all these different subledger details where if you need to make management decisions and they're really just about accounts payable, well, then those things can be done from the AP subledger. And you don't need that detail in the chart of accounts as an example. But where you're looking across the business or across a department, across a project, in some cases a project, across a country, whatever these business units are that you're talking about, that's the level of granularity that you need in the chart of accounts for forecasting and budgeting.
Moving forward with the next question, could you provide examples of budget heads for industries like construction, healthcare, clinical trials, and automobile dealerships?
At a summary level, if you think about what's in a P&L, as an example, they're similar. You have your revenue, you have your direct costs that go into that revenue, and that usually translates into something like a gross margin. But in different industries, you're going to see that there are different standards along the lines of, well, are you talking about revenue or net revenue? Are you talking about gross sales before net revenue? For the direct costs, are we talking about, cost of goods sold, store operations, different things? Or are you talking about direct costs and cost of goods sold or cost of revenue if we talk about a SaaS business model? And then below that, you'll have, what is it that comes into what I usually call as contribution margin. So below cost of goods is your marketing and your cost of acquisition costs. Now, whether you call that cost of acquisition, CAC, or if you call that marketing or direct marketing expense or different things, those are going to depend on your industry or what your peers are doing. It's really just more about making analysts be able to easily understand what you're doing compared to other companies similar to yours.
Okay, that makes sense. So moving forward, how can AI help in maintaining the integrity of budget heads or the structure within the COA?
Businesses are always changing. And so a lot of times what you'll have is it's very difficult to change your chart of accounts in your ERP system. So when something new happens, you develop a new business line, a new revenue stream, you acquire a new company or something, it usually takes some time before the accountants are able to go through the process and update the chart of accounts. They usually like to do that ideally at a year end or at some major period change. AI is wonderful because it can help do those mappings from what's in the chart of accounts to what's in a forecast. And it can help manage, call it in real time, how do you translate the legacy stuff to or just whatever is actual in your chart of accounts to whatever the forecast view is that your management needs to see either for budget or management reporting.
I agree. So moving forward with the next question, what are the common challenges organizations face in integrating budgets with the COA in ERP systems?
A lot of times it has to do with just consistency and accuracy. So I was the director for a large global company in the S&P 500, big company, and I was responsible for producing the budgets and rolled up forecasts and all these things that go to investors and analysts. And when I would produce the quarterly views or the monthly management reporting, there's a lot of reconciliations you have to do to see how it ties to what you thought it was going to be and all these tie outs. Very often, in fact, usually if there was some number that seemed off, it was oftentimes because someone in accounting had tagged a cost to an account code that was different than what we had understood it was going to be when we forecast it. Now, it was all for good reasons. It was usually that something had changed in the business. But if the accounting team isn't communicating those changes to the FP&A team, then there's inconsistencies that show up in how numbers appear in management reporting or in forecasts compared, management reporting compared to budget will be different. So that can be challenging. A lot of times those just come down to, communication and making sure things are, in this case, manually updated, but that's where trouble would come in usually.
That was really insightful. So we have reached towards the end of our interview. This is the last question. How can organizations leverage AI to overcome this challenge?
I've seen multiple examples now where AI is able to essentially help manage in real time that mapping that we're talking about. And yes, you need to provide it some guidance around here's how we map things, but you can also then ask whatever that management decision question is, and it's able to pull in the appropriate accounts and the appropriate numbers to the view that you need. So what I was describing before, as far as like inconsistent or just changes that might happen, you don't need to wait for that manual mapping to happen. Now, I would also suggest, though, AI can also tell you where those changes have happened. Hey, we've identified a change here. You need to make sure that's mapped in accurately in your budgets. So there's lots of different ways that AI will be able to and is helping companies that I'm working with.
That was very insightful. Thank you so much, Jon, for those insights. It's clear that AI has a big role to play in the future of financial management. Thank you so much for joining us today.